For the next hour, we're going to dive into some of the crisis contexts in which our teams work, from the wars in Gaza, Sudan, and Ukraine, to political and humanitarian crisis in Haiti, to the earthquakes this last year in Turkey, Syria, and Morocco, to crackdowns on queer communities in Nicaragua, Ghana, and Russia. We're going to get to hear from some of the team leads of our busiest language teams at Respond, who are leading this work on the front lines of these crises. And they'll explain how the work that they're doing, as well as the people on their teams doing this work, are all too often the linchpins across the contexts I've mentioned. And what I mean by linchpins is literally these folks on their teams doing this work are making the difference between life and death for hundreds of thousands of the world's most vulnerable people navigating and fleeing crises and conflicts worldwide. Though of course we hear more about some of these contexts than we do about others, in general, our public understanding fails to capture the absolutely central role that language plays in both short and long-term crisis response. As Ariel mentioned, filing an application for asylum requires that all evidence, sometimes hundreds of pages, be translated into English, and navigating immigration and asylum court systems can take years. After arriving in a new country, of course, asylum and immigration processes are not the only thing to do. Folks need language support to find housing, to get medical and psychological care, to get their kids enrolled in school, and to communicate with their children's teachers, to access job support programs and other basic social services. Building a new life in a new language in a new country after being forced to flee takes years, and every step of the way, language access support, having an empathetic, trauma-informed translator or interpreter by one's side, is absolutely essential. And yet, the reality is that this essential language work, on which so much of crisis response, migration, and resettlement systems depend, is systematically undervalued. The lack of prioritizing funding to be able to pay language practitioners a just wage for their essential labor drives a systemic translation shortage. The absence of talent to career pipelines makes it almost impossible for many linguistic minorities to access professionalization opportunities and to earn a just wage for their labor, despite the fact that the demand for their work is already overwhelming and constantly increasing. So as we've heard, the demand for the labor is there, along with an expectation that the labor be provided for free. On top of all of this, governments and other institutions increasingly think they can rely on machine translation tools to help them process the mounting refugee crises at their borders. But we see through our work time and time again, and you will all see soon too, that machine translation is no replacement for compassionate, trauma-informed human language practitioners. So this is the reality that Respond intervenes in every day and works to change. And in the second half of our panel, we'll hear from our team leads about why job creation, just wages, and building talent to career pipelines are so central to the long-term sustainability of the work of their teams. So before we jump into hearing about the work, I'd like to introduce you to our team leads. Tanya Grigorieva leads our Eastern European and post-Soviet languages team, which represents more than 25 different language combinations. Over the last 2 years, she's built out a team of more than 830 linguists who've supported more than 1,300 cases for asylum seekers and refugees fleeing across Europe, Latin America, and the US. Tatiana Garcia leads our Spanish team and co-leads our training program. The Spanish team is the busiest team at Respond, supporting more than 30 cases every week, almost entirely pro bono. Tati's Spanish team has translated over 7,500 cases in support of more than 130,000 Spanish-speaking asylum seekers and refugees from across South and Latin America. Ralph Olivier Pierre could not be here with us today. He's our Haitian Creole co-lead. He lost his wallet at the airport and then was not able to travel to the US from Mexico. So Laura Wagner, who founded and led our Haitian Creole team for years and is now our policy co-director along with Layla, is stepping in to represent the work of the Haitian Creole team for us today. The Creole team has supported over 1,200 cases in support of Haitians forced to flee Haiti, both before and after the assassination of Haiti's authoritarian US-backed president in 2021, which only deepened the country's political and humanitarian crisis. Leila Lorenzo is our policy co-director along with Laura. and also founded our Afghan languages team just before the collapse of the US-backed Afghan government to the Taliban. Perfect. In the summer of 2021. Since then, our Afghan languages team has supported more than 2,200 asylum cases for more than 30,000 asylum seekers. Today, Layla will speak to the work of our Afghan languages, Kurdish, and Arabic teams. And finally, Valentina Cagliari-Lewis leads our Indigenous and Marginalized Languages team, which is a vast network of language practitioners representing over 160 different languages. Val's teams have both experienced themselves and provided support in crisis situations around the world that haven't even made it into the headlines, like the ongoing violence and instability in the Tigray region of Ethiopia, instability in Mauritania, flooding in Bangladesh, the list goes on. Val's teams have supported more than 2,500 cases for more than 4,400,000 people. So I'm wondering if we could start with each of you giving us a broad overview of your team's work, as well as some context to the crisis situations to which you've responded. And particularly, I would love it if you could all speak to the nature, the life or death nature of the work that you see through the casework of your teams. And Tanya, could you start us off?
Thank you, Meg. Our team has been in crisis response mode since Russia launched full-scale invasion to Ukraine 2 years and 4 months ago. During this time, I could see like hundreds of cases to see how we made a difference in life and death situations. Back when the war started, my team sent a volunteer, Ada, to the Ukrainian-Polish border, where it was the main point for Ukrainian refugees to flee, handing out crisis translation leaflets, advertising our ability to assist with the language. At that point, it was crucial. It was February, it was cold. There were 1,000 people at the border, and some of them could not cross for a week, and they did not have clothing or basic necessities. They did not know where are they going, and they were scared. So the language assistance need was just incredible, because they could not communicate in any European countries. According to UN statistics, there were 18 million refugees fled Ukraine at the beginning of the war. Since that, during these 2 years, we've translated and interpreted 100 upon 100 cases for refugees from Ukraine and asylum seekers from Russia. Let me give you some examples. A woman, a Ukrainian refugee, goes to the hospital in Berlin. She's suspected with a breast cancer. She's scared, and she doesn't have anybody to talk to. This is a life and death situation. So interpreter role is crucial here. It's a link for her to navigate, to speak to the doctor and find out if she's gonna die or she's gonna live and what's happening to her. I reached out to my team and I found interpreter who is competent in medical translation from Ukrainian to German. Luckily, one of our project managers, Christina, is fluent in German, and she's specializing in medical translations. She's a refugee herself, and she was able to interpret. Another woman has already fled to UK, and she has already stage 3 cancer. She has an urgent appointment in the clinic, and her outcome of her medical treatment depends on the translation of a huge medical file that is a mix of Ukrainian and Russian language and doctor's handwriting and scribbles, and it needs to be translated urgently. So I reach out to the team, I find translators from Ukrainian, from Russian, translators who are able to read the scribbles and handwriting. These are only native speakers, as these are all different skill sets. And then I find a medical proofreader who could proofread text from the medical perspective. And we translated hundreds of cases like that. We have requests from refugees for employment, for registration, for employment. We have requests from a refugee who is looking for a house, and I find an interpreter for her, and we help her to find a house. I want to refer to this quote where we translated. We had 15 volunteers translating in a week and a half. That's really short period of time. A huge medical file for little Ukrainian refugee boy with a brain tumor, brain cancer, and it's mostly the documents are it's a mess. It's not electronic. It's just like pile of papers, really difficult to translate. So it was like a really great team effort, and we did translate the medical history. So the boy lived. I believe that our intervention was crucial here, how fast and how efficient we did it. And let me tell one case I want to share about that's a little different from our refugee and asylum legal and medical casework. We translated a book for Ukrainian school. It's Cambridge Certification Handbook. It allowed Ukrainian school to be certified for Cambridge exams. So children, when they pass the exam, they can enter Cambridge automatically. This project was prominent because it's for Ukrainian children, the most affected by the war. And they are future of Ukraine, their future to rebuild Ukraine, and I believe their future so for the world democracy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tanya, for taking us through that. The work of your team is in so many ways so particular because of that starting point with Ada going to the Polish-Ukrainian border and passing out those leaflets, and then the resulting deluge of cases that you got from individual Ukrainian refugees, many of whom were chronically or terminally ill and were fleeing across Europe and urgently needed to land in hospitals and medical institutions to resume their care. So it's incredible the work that you've done to build a team capable of supporting all of those cases. Tati, your work, on the other hand, is in support of folks who are fleeing from across South and Latin America, which is a huge range of different countries and cultures and linguistic variants. I wonder if you could take us into the work of the Spanish team.
Hi everyone, thank you for the opportunity to share this. So I would like to first refer to the slide and the story about this particular translator who was interpreting and translating. She did both for this case of a Venezuelan family who suffered discrimination because of their political affiliations and from the regime, and they didn't get their food boxes. And at the same time, she was also going through her family becoming increasingly or concerningly thin after during the food shortages over there. And this is sort of what we try to do in response. We pair up people who can be empathetic towards the situations that asylum seekers are going through, and I think that's really powerful. What often happens in Latin America is that we think if we are not hearing anything in particular about it, it must be all going well. And we think about it also as a monolith, when in fact we're very diverse, and in fact things have got worse, and we have tons of cases every week for folks who come from humanitarian crisis in detention centers in the US, Guatemalan and Honduran LGBT discrimination, Nicaragua's and Venezuela's dictatorships, and also armed groups threatening populations in Colombia and Mexico. There's thousands of people who are still stuck at the border in detention centers or just waiting to be let in the country and have to wait for months or even years to get someone to listen to their stories. And there are individual stories to every asylum claim. We had, for example, this Venezuelan family. They were denied food boxes because they protested the socialist regime. We also supported the case of a Colombian civil rights advocate who received threats into leaving the country because he was defending and providing shelter for gay kids who were kicked out of their homes. We also worked with a Guatemalan woman who had to flee her home because her husband had escalated violence to a point where she feared for the lives of her children. And we are currently supporting 222 Nicaraguan opposition members who were tortured and imprisoned for years and had their passports revoked by the regime. And I don't know if you know what happens when your passports get revoked by the government. It means that you are stateless, you don't have any citizenship, and there's no jurisdiction to really protect you at all. You're not from here, you're not from them, there, no one's claiming to protect you. If we had not translated their evidence, all these individuals wouldn't have received the support that they needed to survive and also to find the resources to move on with their lives in a new country. Then I also work in the training team, and the matter of life or death there is that we make sure that translators and interpreters are sufficiently prepared to take on these cases and these tasks that they're doing, because we know how dangerous mistranslation can be, and interpreting mistakes as well in these situations. I focus on interpreting training, and I see how policies like Biden's bring your own interpreter do not require interpreters to have any prior training. The guidelines even suggest that you bring your own interpreter who is a neighbor or just someone that you know, and that they should translate what you're saying word by word. And when dealing with difficult cases, it's very important to be culturally aware. We will see more about this if we have the time in the machine translation workshop. But as an example, if I were to say that my cucho died, and I had a Chilean interpreter or a Chilean person who is just bilingual and is I happen to grab from somewhere to bring to these appointments, they would think that my cat has died, when in fact I am Colombian. I would be meaning that my dad has died. And that can make the difference between getting your asylum heard or not. So a trained interpreter will be able to discern these cultural nuances and hopefully prevent the removal of asylum seekers who are rightfully looking for protections.
Thank you, Tati. Your work building out talented career pipelines in our training infrastructure has been so instrumental to so many of our teams, but particularly to the Haitian Creole team, as because of the colonial and imperial legacy in Haiti, there is no translation and interpretation training available for folks speaking Haitian Creole. It's all done in French. So Laura, I wondered if you could speak to the work of the Haitian Creole team.
Sure. So if you follow the news at all, you probably know that Haiti is in crisis, and there's always this talk of perpetual crisis in Haiti, whether that is people who are victims of earthquakes or other unnatural disasters, but also people who are now fleeing gang violence, displaced from their homes, being kidnapped and killed, unable to make a living, go to school, or lead ordinary lives because of gang violence that has overtaken the country. So you would think that based on these facts, that Haitians would have a compelling case for asylum. But US asylum policy isn't based on whether your suffering is real. It's based on whether that suffering is the result of, among other things, political persecution. And legally speaking, a general climate of violence or insecurity is not enough to justify a claim to political asylum. One thing that I want to underscore here is that this so-called gang violence is in fact political violence. These gangs aren't autonomous entities that are separate from the government and the international community that selects and funds and props up these governments. News reports of Haitian gangs tend not to, they tend to focus on young men from poor neighborhoods with guns wearing masks. They don't talk about what Haitian people might call the gang à cravate, which is to say the gangs that wear ties. In other words, the politicians and the elites that fund and arm these gangs. The gang à cravate, so like gangs with ties, like a necktie. Yeah. Although they also have political ties, so I guess, yeah. So while asylum law, as we said, focuses on individual persecution, the idea of somebody being personally targeted because of their political beliefs or because they belong to a particular social group or category, the very arbitrariness of the violence in Haiti is the point. It's the idea that anyone, regardless of who they are or what they believe, could become a victim at any point for no reason at all. And to illustrate that point, Ralph wanted us to share a story of a client that he interpreted for, whose family fled Haiti because a certain political party and the gangs that they fund and arm were threatening his life. And this gang had even killed the client's neighbor simply because the neighbor had tried to protect the client by lying and saying that he wasn't home. So killing this neighbor was an obvious message to the client. In other words, you're next. And this story shows that anybody, as I said, regardless of their political affiliation, or even if you don't have a political affiliation, can become a victim of political violence. This particular client and his family fled Port-au-Prince and then Haiti for Chile, and even there, gunmen employed by this political party found him. And so this is all to say that this violence is pervasive, it's widespread, and it shows how important our work is in translating not only people's words, but the context of their experiences and life or death struggles.
Thank you, Laura. It's so important to understand the political nature of both asylum and language. Leila, can you tell us more about what your Kurdish and Afghan languages and Arabic teams do?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Meg. In terms of the life and death nature of the work of our teams that span the South and Southwest Asian and North African regions, or SWANA, which is a decolonial term for the Middle East, I want to begin by telling you about the response work that our Kurdish language team provided in the aftermath of the 7.8 magnitude earthquakes that struck Turkey and Syria in February of 2023. It's little known that areas impacted were predominantly Kurdish speaking, but despite this, emergency resources, for example, where to find shelter, food, how to charge phones, and how to get emergency healthcare for those injured, were translated into 7 languages except for Kurdish. This language violence is occurring in a political context where Kurdish has been functionally banned in the 4 countries in which Kurds originate from: Iran, Iraq, Syria, Turkey, and where mass executions of Kurds have been routine throughout the last century. Today actually is the anniversary of the murder of Farzad Kamangar, who was a translator, a poet, a Kurd from Iran. He was executed at a Evin prison in Tehran. He was charged with moharebe, which is warring against God, for just speaking his language. This is a story that we've told on our website through our Kurdish storytelling project, so I encourage people to take a look at that when they have time. As for the earthquakes, it's certain that the lack of the language support after these earthquakes was and remains a matter of life and death, because the language and humanitarian aid deprivation, we know for a fact, is intentionally state-inflicted. The people impacted by the 2023 earthquake, many of whom only speak Kurdish, were left without any information about how to get support. So our Kurdish team plugged in to translate these key resources into Kurdish, which allowed hundreds of folks injured in the earthquakes to access the resources that they needed. So clearly having skilled interpreters doesn't just allow communication. We have to understand and provide the critical political, historical, cultural context, which can make or break this type of work. Meanwhile, over the last 7 months, the war in Gaza, as we know, has escalated to an almost unimaginable level of atrocity and humanitarian crisis. There's been a full blockade on Gaza for 17 years, makes it nearly impossible to leave the Gaza Strip, and those who are able to leave are often rendered stateless. Our Arabic team has been supporting Gazans and Palestinians in myriad ways. Since October 7th, we've translated over 1 million words for Gaza, translated over 100 humanitarian parole and asylum applications, interpreted Know Your Rights workshops for folks facing political persecution, translated political education resources, and translated for Gaza journalists reporting on the siege. We continue to work with 7 U.S. based legal aid organizations to translate supporting evidence for humanitarian parole applications into English and to interpret between attorneys and Gazan asylum seekers. We've also heard from partners on the ground that the biggest need for Gazans who have made it to Egypt, which is where all Palestinians who manage to leave Gaza, at least initially, end up, is for interpreters to support in hospitals, facilitating communication between foreign, non-Arabic speaking volunteers and Gazans who are in need of medical care. In June, actually, contingent on funding, our Arabic team lead Aya and our operations director Meg will travel to Cairo to coordinate an in-person interpretation network to support. And they're gonna recruit translators, lead live trainings in medical interpreting and trauma-informed language praxis for translators who we know are very talented, multilingual Gazan Palestinians who are currently based in Egypt, and we're gonna pay these interpreters for their work. Finally, as for our Afghan languages teams, since the Taliban takeover of the Afghan government in 2021, our Afghan languages team has been working to support tens of thousands of Afghans seeking asylum in the United States. Last year, Respond's life-saving language access work was centered in an article titled AI Translation is Jeopardizing Afghan Asylum Claims in an outlet called Rest of World. This article explains how governments and refugee aid organizations are increasingly relying on machine translation to cut costs. As we know, this is not only costing translators their jobs, but endangering countless asylum cases. Respond's Afghan languages team was able to intervene and continues to intervene in life-saving ways here. For example, Ariel mentioned earlier that there was an asylum claim that was rejected due to a machine switching all I pronouns to we. And it's very likely that in this instance, the translator used the machine translation available for the Persian of Iran, which is known as Farsi, not the Persian of Afghanistan, which is called Dari. Currently, there's actually no machine translation option for Afghanistan's major languages, Dari or Pashto. So this is one of countless examples of Respond's community-centered approach where we're counteracting a life or death situation because of the rejection of this case. If this case had been rejected, which it initially was actually, it was reversed, but if it hadn't been reversed, that would have sent the female client back to Taliban-ruled Afghanistan. Not an ideal outcome, absolutely not. And finally, we know it's well documented that numerous watchdog organizations have observed USCIS has failed to process Afghan humanitarian parole applications in a reasonable time frame. For example, between January 1st, 2020 through mid-2022, USCIS received 45,000 applications from Afghans and collected hundreds, if not thousands of dollars from each of them. They only approved 114 of those applications. That's less than 0.3% of all of those applications. That bottleneck has de facto rendered this pathway for Afghan refugees closed, completely closed. So that makes it really vital for the cases that are successfully undergoing adjudication to not face this additional language access barrier. And for any of us who are trying to help these populations, to ensure that these populations are not further endangered. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Layla. The work of each of those teams is so incredibly busy, and each political context is so different. So thank you for taking us through all of that. Similarly, Val, you lead a team that represents 160 languages and spans the entire world. Could you take us into what some casework looks like on your team?
For sure. Thank you so much, everyone. It's an honor for me to be here talking about the work of my team, representing them. So every team at Respond Crisis Translation does work that demonstrate how critical language access and justice are, as you can see from all the answers before me. But I think the less frequent Indigenous and Marginalized Languages team has a special insight of the role language practitioners play for people who are dealing with the consequences of political and social crisis across the world. On a daily basis, I work to pair translators and interpreters with people who speak a less frequent, marginalized, indigenous, or otherwise rare language. So violence across the world often means that, I want to say that violence across the world against linguistic minorities often means that the people who are the most victimized and need the most help are usually the ones who have the hardest time accessing it in their language. So, crazy. I know, but it's just, it really bothers me. And I actually wrote about this unique double bind in an essay for Team Vogue last year. And just to illustrate this work and give you a few examples of the cases my team has intervened in, I work daily with Indigenous language speakers and with Indigenous language translators and interpreters that speak different languages spoken in Central America. And one case we had last year was that of a child who speaks Cachiquel, which is a language spoken, a Mayan language spoken in Guatemala. And so the child was going to school and he witnessed a violent event, and he had to flee his country. Imagine a minor child making his way to the US, seeking asylum, not speaking English, but he was taken in by a shelter, and so that he could seek asylum and continue his education in the US, he needed to be emancipated from his parents. And so they reached out to us, and we provided a qualified Cachiquel interpreter who was able to provide interpretation for the parents, and so that the hearing could be conducted. I also work daily with victims and survivors of violence and persecution, either due to political reason or sexual identity. So some of our asylum clients speak Hausa, which is a language spoken in Ghana. And in Ghana, LGBTQ plus communities are to this day still criminalized. And so we have one of our interpreters provide assistance to these men who fled Ghana, and they worked for months. I have no idea how many hours, I don't remember it right now, but they worked for so long. And fortunately, the man was granted asylum after working with our interpreter, and I actually cried when I read this and saw his face. And we have recently supported many detainees who speak Garre, which is a language spoken in Somalia. And finding Garre interpreters is extremely difficult. But fortunately, we did build a small team of Garre interpreters, and we helped one client, and he was released from detention and now can continue the immigration process outside a detention center. And we also help speakers of Bisa, which is a language spoken in Burkina Faso. And these clients are attending therapy because they are torture and armed conflict survivors, and they are attending therapy, and they would not be able to attend therapy without our interpreters. So I guess you can see in each of these cases how having an interpreter and translator in these marginalized languages not only makes our clients' experiences in this medical, legal, immigration, and other systems better, but it actually gives them the ability to have access to those systems in the first place. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Val. I just wanted to add that Val's team represents 160 languages, but that number is actually constantly growing. Almost every single week we get requests in new languages, some languages that none of us have ever heard of, and Val has to do frantic work trying to find folks who are qualified. Then Tati steps in to do last-minute work trying to really provide training and preparation to folks one-on-one to ensure that they're ready to step into these really high-stakes scenarios. So it's really around-the-clock labor, finding folks who can support in these cases. So I want to talk now about our vision at Respond of a workforce of trained and trauma-informed human language practitioners who are able to access professional development opportunities and earn dignified, life-sustaining wages for their labor. I wonder if you could each tell us a story of someone on your team for whom accessing training and professional development opportunities and earning an income for this work was impactful. And Tanya, could you start us off again?
Sure. I will speak about how Respond gave me and other refugees from Ukraine, and not only refugees from Ukraine, opportunity how to translate our skills into meaningful impact to other refugees, other people affected by the war. I joined Respond as a volunteer translator when Russian full-scale invasion to Ukraine started in 2022. And when the war started, I was emotionally destroyed, and I was in fear, and I felt helpless. I felt like there is nothing I can do to change things and how to help my people. So finding this work with Respond at that point gave me like a purpose of my life. So I can do something to help. I can be active, and I can change something. And most of my teammates went through the same. And I want to tell about one day in my life before fleeing from Ukraine to Mexico in December 2023. I wake up in the middle of the night, sleeping in the corridor on the yoga mat, as the air alarm was on, and we had to stay between two walls. Means like two walls have to separate me from outside in case missile hit. There is some protection. So we all like spending sleepless nights on the floor. There is no electricity at the apartment, and it's cold at the apartment, as Russia is ruining energy infrastructure. Water pumps, cellular network is also powered by electricity. So we have no cell phone connection, no internet, and no running water. I live on the 9th floor, so just there's no water reaching in. So I go to get water by foot, and elevators are not working. And of course, the sound of we call it PPO, is anti-air defense. It's like as much as the same loud as the sound of missiles is drone, and it's scary. So finally, electricity comes back, and I'm able to open my laptop and check the translation requests for Respond. So this worked, kept me going, and kept me like surviving, and kept my mind focusing. The same from a lot of my teammates who had to flee Ukraine and who lost their jobs because of that. Our project manager, Christina, had to flee Ukraine to United Kingdom via Germany after 4 missiles hit near her house. She translated over 50 cases, 50 medical complicated cases, and she won this prestigious Workers' Educational Association award. And her continuing education helped to build her language skills to help more with Respond. Among the others, we helped help to translate asylum cases is our project manager from Belarus, Alexander. He was prosecuted in Belarus for his anti-war activities, and he had to flee to Poland with his wife and son. So we helped to translate his asylum case, and he actually got an asylum in Poland. Our screener and project manager Anastasia is from Donetsk, the same city I was born at, that was occupied by Russians in 2014. She is in UK now, and she's actively translating, interpreting, and screening new volunteers for Respond. We have like 13 Ukrainian refugees working from all over the world, UK, Germany, Canada, United States, and we have translators and interpreters in Ukraine. Lydia Novinska is 74. This is a quote from her. Salary, like income that she gets from Respond, is the only mean for her to survive and support her cat shelter. And she is like literally texting me almost every day, please give me some job, give me some work to translate, because I'm scared, I cannot sleep nights. Like if I work on translation, I'm focused, and I can survive to the next night, to the next day. Or she's texting me, give me translations, my cats are out of food. So this quote is saying from her for this work. So for all of us and a lot of other refugees and asylees from Russia, also translators respond was it was a mean for us to live and to survive and to support our families. Like for example, my mom was evacuated twice, and she's 74 also. I'm the only one who can support her, and I depend on Respond. And for us, it was like matter of life, but it also like a community. Because we all stay in touch, we all have the same spirit of helping people, we communicate, and for us it's to survive, to fight, to survive through the war, to keep a good spirit, and to, I hope, to rebuild Ukraine in future.
Thank you so much, Tanya. It's so particular to be translating and interpreting these stories while you yourself are living the same stories. And it's so relevant to the Ukrainian team and to so many other of our language teams. And I just want to say we're so grateful and honored to have you on the team leading this work. Tati, I wondered if you could speak to this on the Spanish team, as well as speaking to the work that you and Aya have together spearheaded building out talent to career pipelines.
Hi. So a big piece of what we do in the training team is lead training for system impacted translators and interpreters. With system impacted, we mean folks who do language work but didn't have the same means and the same opportunities to learn about translation and interpreting because of the failures in our systems, in the different systems in the world. We noticed from the beginning of our work that training programs for translators and interpreters included no information about the impact, the psychological and emotional impact of this work. I know that I went to a university, I did a translation and interpreting program, and I did not get training in this aspect in university. It was only when I started interpreting for victims of the armed conflict in Colombia that I even heard about the term vicarious trauma. And I realized how at risk we are as language workers of absorbing the trauma that we are relaying and the stories that we are telling in our own words. I don't know if you know, but when you're interpreting, you're not supposed to say like, she said this, they said that. It's more like speaking in the first person, taking on that role in certain way, so we're very likely to absorb that trauma. So we created the trauma-informed trainings for translators and interpreters who are working in crisis and trauma context. These trainings are designed to create awareness and teach skill sets about trauma and how to protect our mental health while also taking care of the people that we serve. That means not traumatizing ourselves vicariously, and also thinking about how we can prevent re-traumatization for the folks that we are helping, even though they're having to tell really difficult stories. We also coordinate other types of training, including best practices in translation and interpretation, asylum-specific trainings for interpreters and translators, LGBTQ plus sensitivity, specific trainings for psychological evaluations, which we have to do for asylum claims. And even we've done semester-long trainings for Indigenous language interpreters working on asylum cases. These are the first steps we're taking towards building our development opportunities for language practitioners who might not have had the access to professional training, mainly in indigenous languages from Africa, Asia, and South America. So, for example, here, because we speak, I speak at least Spanish, which is a European language, because of how our systems and the history of colonialism, it's easier for me to get training in Spanish than for Kachikal interpreter to get training in a Mayan language. So so despite that, that lack of training, the folks who are working in those languages are more in need of considering the trauma-informed support that the people are going to need in this high-stakes and complex asylum and legal and medical context. This work requires a tremendous expertise, delicacy, and emotional resilience, and we cannot ethically expect that to go uncompensated. So the story I'm going to talk about is about the Nicaraguan translators, Lucia and Irene. Irene is here. Here's what she had to say about the training. And basically, because of the dictatorship in Nicaragua right now, we were not able to understand what the stories in the asylum claims were saying, like the declarations from asylum seekers. Because of the censorship, we don't really get much media from Nicaragua, and we don't know how people are actually speaking there. So I had to reach out and find Nicaraguan translators who had actually lived through that, and we did some coaching to get these testimonies translated and to actually understand what was going on. And now Irene, well, talking about the development, Irene is working with another organization helping refugees. She went that route. And Lucia is working to start her own interpreting business, whereas before she was working with an over-the-phone interpreting, so like a language line kind of thing. And she was making less than $3 an hour and working over 10 hours per day. So right now, through building our workforce development program, we have already been able to train over 100 individuals to access jobs that they would otherwise be unable to access. And these different trainings are the beginning of our vision of a robust multi-year program for language practitioners, and to also lead a structured talent to career pipeline to get them quality jobs that actually can sustain their families.
Thank you, Taki. The workforce development program that you and Aya, who's our other training program co-lead, have spearheaded together is the reason that so many hundreds of translators in our network have been able to do such high stakes work and get paid for it. And Val, I wonder if you could take us into the relevance of these training programs for our Indigenous and Marginalized Languages team.
For sure. So sometimes the Indigenous and Marginalized Languages team receives requests for interpretation and translation in languages that we never provided services for. So we have to be creative and look for people who can join our network and support these cases. And usually we do that through social media. But in the cases of extremely marginalized languages, we have to be extremely creative. Once we received a request for Garifuna, which is a language spoken in Belize. And we couldn't find anyone who could support this language. But we found a radio station. So we reached out to the radio station, and in turn the radio station connected us with a Garifuna language activist and influencer, who then in turn connected us with an interpreter, a Garifuna interpreter who's very qualified and who joined our team and is now part of our team and is getting paid for doing work, and so we can support these cases now. So this keeps my job very interesting, but the fact that it's so hard to find professional interpreters and translators in these languages, it shows how critical and dangerous the gap in our workforce pipeline is. So this gap comes from a lot of things. It's due to many reasons, usually because there are few resources for Indigenous language speakers and other people who speak marginalized languages, and because they have few opportunities to train themselves as professional translators and interpreters. So this is something we're continuing to address through our talent to career pipelines that we are continuing to expand, as you also can see in the next slide. No, sorry, before? Yeah. So where we created a training for Indigenous community members who had never have access professional training, and this was with Colectivo Vida Digna. And I've seen firsthand how Respond workforce development opportunities have made a huge difference for our team. In the next slide, you can see Farah Mohammed, who is also one of our translators, and he's earning money. And also, we have a translator who was from Ethiopia, and he relocated to Malaysia, and he took a lot of assignments in American Oromo, which are his native languages. And with the money here through Respond Crisis Translation, he was able to pay his education bills, and he completed his degree. So when he got his degree, he got a job also, and also wanted to give back to the community that had helped him through his most difficult times, and now has become an amazing team lead for American Oromo teams. I'm so proud. So in turn, Respond's policies and practices of building the capacity of people who are from these frontline communities or are system impacted themselves actually contributes to better language access for our clients. As I said, Farah Mohammed and many other translators and interpreters on my team are based in refugee camps. And so they are doing translation and interpretation work for the asylum cases of people who are going through this same experiences they've gone through. So this gives them an understanding and empathy and contextual understanding of what they're going through that makes them even more expert translators. So they connect with people who receive our services on an even deeper level, and that also helps our clients. Thank you.
Val. The other piece of context I wanted to give to Val's creative outreach work is that we've actually never said no to a case. So we get requests for new languages almost every single week, and Val does around-the-clock outreach work to try to source qualified interpreters. And all of that has been incredibly successful, so your creativity is on fire. On our Afghan languages team, on the other hand, the most critical piece of getting the work done has been figuring out how to pay translators and interpreters a just wage. And Layla, I wonder if you could take us into this now.
Yeah, thanks, Meg. Here at Respond, we understand that trauma-informed and paid language work is a very important lifeline for people from marginalized communities, and as well as a vital economic stopgap, especially in contexts of political collapse. So I'd like to tell you a bit about my experience in addressing some of the issues that came up for our translators during the US Afghanistan evacuation when I was working on the Iranian and Afghan languages teams. At that point, I found myself receiving numerous pleas from our translators for urgent financial and visa assistance, as well as translators, families, and people in their networks. So in the wake of state collapse, including a complete collapse of the financial system, where virtually all peer-to-peer payment applications like Zelle, Venmo, etc., completely ceased operations overnight, we had to lead around-the-clock mutual aid efforts for Afghan translators who were now at risk under the Taliban. So we mobilized not only to provide our translators with access to trauma-informed therapy, but we also raised $7,000 to provide our Dari and Pashto translators with mutual aid in addition to their paid incomes with Respond in order to sustain themselves during an economic crash, which, as you may or may not know, has resulted in mass deaths by starvation in Taliban-ruled Afghanistan. And we even found a way to get our translators paid when other translation companies, private companies, gave up and stopped paying. So we bent over backwards trying to find ways to pay people, if it meant paying family members, if it meant sending money to bank accounts in Pakistan, where a lot of Afghan refugees are basically have their money stored away from the Taliban. We did that. So now I'd like to read a testimonial from a Dari and Pashto translator on the team that attests to this work. After the collapse of Afghanistan's banks, international agencies gave up on paying Afghans, but Respond went the extra mile. I was contacted by Respond the same day the system collapsed. They asked me what I needed at that moment. They raised a fund for us translators, and they have not abandoned us since. I'm proud to be a Respond translator. Now, you probably have all heard about how the Taliban has forbidden women and girls from accessing higher education and paid work. In the months following the collapse, we did massive outreach to recruit not only women, but also queer interpreters and interpreters from Shia Muslim minority communities, such as the Hazara and Pamiri, many of whom don't leave their basements for months at a time out of fear of literally being killed in the streets, so that we could provide training and income opportunities to them. And in the 3 years since the government collapse, almost all of our translators have left Afghanistan, and Respond has translated their asylum applications and provided emergency support stipends to them in order to facilitate their evacuation. So far, we've paid out over $230,000 to Afghan translators and interpreters on our team for their life-saving work on asylum cases for other Afghans. And certain translators on the Afghan languages team are supporting, on average, 11 family members on the income that they're earning from work with Respond. And this includes family members who are living with complex illnesses, type 1, type 2 diabetes, neurological conditions like essential tremor, for which there's very limited treatment in Afghanistan now. So also I wanted to add that our Afghan languages team lead, Uma Mikhail, herself, she's a refugee from Afghanistan. So in addition to this, professionalization opportunities and paid work is utterly essential to the work of all three teams, Afghan languages, Kurdish, Arabic teams. And the workload currently for both Afghan languages and Arabic is so vast that it's entirely unethical to not pay people. And in addition to this, linguists who are working particularly in Dari, Pashto, Arabic, Kurdish, they've got little to no access to translation and interpretation training in their languages. And English language education generally is also pretty difficult to access in Afghanistan and Palestine. It's not as ubiquitous as here, obviously. And further, languages like English, those are quite different from the various languages spoken throughout West and Central Asia, which makes it hard to learn. So professionalization opportunities are really a top priority for us. I'd also like to mention that our training leads, Tati, Aya, have built out a number of essential trainings in the basic skills interpretation and translation, trauma-informed language practice, translating legal English, as well as trainings that are specific to the difficulties that, for example, Afghan language practitioners face when they're translating in legal, asylum, and medical contexts. So these trainings are absolutely instrumental in ensuring that our translators and interpreters can continue to improve their skills. And this is really critical in the context of Swana languages, given that access to English language training and translation work is one of the few avenues for economic stability and mobility in an otherwise economically corrupt, remittance, aid-dependent Central Asia. Finally, I also want to note that trauma-informed work is also critical to the peoples coming from the Swana region, because the political context expose not only our clients, but also our translators, our system-impacted translators, not only to post-traumatic stress, because this is not merely post. We know it's ongoing, complex, unrelenting trauma, and they're dealing with this without the mental health infrastructure to address these issues. So that makes it all the more necessary that we're providing these trainings to best serve our clients and our translators. So thus, that workforce development training, very beneficial professionally in terms of skill building, but also allowing for the community and the resiliency building necessary to both live with and contend with the effects of trauma while also remaining active in the workforce.
Thanks. Thank you, Leila. Another team for whom just wages are absolutely central to getting the work done is the Haitian Creole team. So could you close us out with speaking to the Haitian Creole team, Laura?
Sure. So all of the translators and interpreters on the Haitian Creole team are paid. Many of them are based in Haiti, where the cost of living is skyrocketing, the currency is weak. As I mentioned, the security situation makes it very difficult for people to go to work. There are areas of the capital that are basically no-go zones, so people are losing their jobs simply because they can't get into or pass through certain parts of town. In addition, because Haitian Creole is marginalized and stigmatized, even within Haiti, even though Creole is also the only language that 100% of Haitian people speak, there are, as Meg mentioned, few professionalization and workforce development opportunities for Haitian Creole language practitioners. So I just wanted to go through some testimonials from some of our language practitioners. This is Dalia. She is one of the interpreters on the Haitian Creole team, and she is a medical student in Haiti. And for her, working with Respond has allowed her to give back to her community in a way where she can also continue to pursue her rigorous medical training. And she adds that by supporting Respond, you are directly supporting people like her who are still living in Haiti, while also allowing them to in turn help other Haitians. Another translator who's based in Haiti told us that receiving payment for something that she loves to do is great, especially given how hard it is to get a job in Haiti. She is someone who, as she put it, voluntarily self-deported from the United States because she didn't have papers. And so getting paid for her work gave her another chance to survive in a country where it is very difficult to find work. Many of our other interpreters and translators are Haitian immigrants in the US, in Mexico, and elsewhere. One Haitian immigrant in the US explained that after losing her job due to the pandemic, she relied on paid work from Respond to help support herself and her young son while continuing to help her community. Ralph, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, is also a medical student in Mexico. And because of the situation in Haiti, his parents can't always send US dollars to convert to pesos, even if they have the money, because you can only withdraw a very limited number of US dollars from the bank in Haiti. So working for Respond allows Ralph not only to support himself, but also his siblings who are also in Mexico. Another interpreter emphasized the importance of this job being paid not only in words, but also with a salary. And finally, I will close with an interpreter, Nadej, who explains that compensation helps support a translation practitioner's career, enabling them to make a living on a craft that they're passionate about, while also serving a great cause for human dignity.
Because we're running quite short on time, I'm going to skip my closing and just ask you to join me in thanking our team leads who have